Nekrosor Ammentar, the new bad guy from the Necrons, has arrived. If you haven't seen this guy's picture, he looks pretty badass, and he's actually getting a new model coming out with the 500 Worlds campaign. Nekrosor Ammentar is a new colossal threat to the Imperium of Man, and quite frankly to every single Necron as well, because he is, if the rumors are true, the first destroyer. The thing about the Necrons in the novels is that usually they're these kind of tragic, soulless aristocrats engaging in this kind of political fighting that's very famous, and while they're trying to, get one up over one another, they're also working towards a long-term goal of basically regaining their flesh and blood bodies back, a vain hope most likely, something they probably can't really achieve, but they're nonetheless giving it their best shot. But when you get to the destroyers, you enter something entirely different. So these guys looked at just the concept of living and they thought, no thank you, none of that please. We'd prefer it if literally nothing existed at all. In The Infinite and the Divine, Trazen the Infinite speaks to a Locust Destroyer who kind of explains the core philosophy of how the destroyers work. The destroyer says that they aren't just soldiers, they are complete nihilists, and they are all obsessed with something called the Great Scouring. Ket Var puts it, if I remember correctly, to cease to exist is the happy fate of all who serve the Great Scouring, and that their goal is to ensure that all life must end, even their own. And when the destroyers say they want to exterminate all life, they mean all of it. They are described as mathematically thorough in this ambition. So on the world of Serenade, we get this group of destroyers who have spent thousands of years eradicating all life on the planet. They started with things like the apex predators, then the plants, then the insects, and then finally they just get down to the microorganisms. So they boil all the lakes and streams on the planet so that no fresh water remains. They even hunt down the microbes on the planet, and Ket Var actually has a plan to melt the polar ice caps to desalinate the oceans, killing the phytoplankton that manufacture the majority of the world's oxygen. It is a petty level of destruction. They are really committed to the idea that no life shall survive in the galaxy. And we've always wondered in Warhammer 40k, what were the origins of this affliction, this kind of destroyer curse that overcomes some of the Necrons? And it's not just about being evil. In another novel called Indomitus, there's a character called Zozar the Destroyer, and he's actually a really interesting part of this novel. This space robot who's lost his soul, but he's also a phenomenally tragic character. He was originally, when he was one of the Necron tier, he was a relatively low-ranking noble, but he lost his wife, Cleophatia, and his daughters during the biotransference. We actually see, from his point of view, what it was like when Zozar saw his children crumble away into nothing. There is a reason in Warhammer 40k you don't see baby Necron warriors, and the reason for that is because all of the younger Necron tier, they turned to dust. They were completely destroyed by the biotransference process. So his descendants into madness seems very connected to that in the novel, because he, of course, is driven by an eternal hatred of the fact that he turned his wife into a Necron warrior and destroyed his children. So we sort of have had these hints over the years as to where things like the Destroyer Curse come from, but ultimately it seems to go a bit beyond that. In the Twice Dead King, another Necron novel, we have more destroyers seemingly connected to this idea of being like a Red Marshal, and the Red Marshals are these Necrons who, when the Necrons were the Necron tier and their sun was absolutely brutal, the sun of their original home planet, they would literally make sacrifices to the sun in an attempt to appease it, and the Red Marshals would go and mark commoners and send them out into the desert to die. So they were, even before they were the Necrons, they were not nice people. It's got to be clear there. But again, once again, we always had this sort of hints as to what the origins of this Destroyer Curse was and why there are these Necrons that seemingly all the other Necrons actually hate. Even in the most recent novel for the Necrons that we had, Tomb World, there's a Deathmark character called Arnuret, and we actually see in the novel her fall to the Destroyer Curse throughout the book. And her obsession is more in terms of like the uncleanness of life. She hates all humanity. She hates all kind of biological life because it's unclean. It's a stain on the galaxy, and therefore, as she falls to the curse, she realizes that the galaxy must be cleansed of this kind of unclean filth. So the actual origins of the Destroyer curse are one of those things in 40k that's long kind of been a mystery, and now it seems we might have an answer. Many shrug off the legend of the Necrosaur as a parable or myth. Nekrosor Ammentar is afflicted by the same maddening virus that warps the Destroyer cults into single-minded killing machines, but unlike all others, its advanced mind is not held entirely in thrall to its base desires. Some even suggest that it was the first to succumb to the virus, and thus is the genesis of all Destroyers, though no records exist to confirm such suspicions save those in the mind of the Silent King, and Zarek is not a talkative chap. What all Necrons learn through dread reputation and traumatic experience is that a pool of psychosis follows Ammentar and twists the minds of those it passes near, turning everyone from the lowest Tomb World orderly to the highest overlord into raging beasts hungry for death on a galactic scale. Few even realize their protocols have been completely overwritten until it's too late, and they're strapping hyperphase blades onto their arms with cold glee. Those who don't come willingly are forcibly converted into destroyers by Ammentar's enthralled cryptics, and as you might imagine, this makes it a touch unpopular. It pretty solidly earns its dark reputation, whether through the slow degradation of time or a catastrophic injury it received in the distant past. The Necrosaur began to harbour an almost religious fascination with the Nightbringer, deadliest of all the Necron's ancient enemies, and has since taken up its master's mantle to shepherd the eradication of all organic life. Its obsession with one of the star gods is repugnant to its fellow Necrons, though few can stop its crusade to obtain every last scattered Catan shard and unleash the Nightbringer anew. If you're wondering whether there might be a shard under the worlds of Ultramar and Ammentar has come to collect, good job, the Ultramarines have no idea quite what's coming to kick down their door. So there we have it. This is going to be the new kind of big campaign for Warhammer 40k, hailing in 11th edition it seems, but most importantly, elevating Captain Titus to even greater heights. So this bad guy intends to return the Nightbringer properly to reality. After the Necrons sundered the Catan into shards, of course they still, basically exist, all of them but Landagor, but they exist in such small pieces, none of them can ever properly threaten to dominate the galaxy ever again. However, according to Ammentar, he believes that if he can gather all of the shards of the Nightbringer together, he can restore the Nightbringer properly to being, and that would unleash basically a new god onto reality, and even the Necrons, they could only really sunder the Catan into shards by getting a sneak attack on the Catan, and afterwards they would only be able to do this by using their technology at the height of its power. And even the Necrons today don't have the technology that they once did, as they're still basically in their awakening stage. So a properly returned Catan would be devastating to the entire setting, and I'm not even sure today whether the Imperium could beat it, but I think the Emperor would give it a crack at the very least, so we will see. But in theory, this is a massive plotline for the future. Not only do we have a campaign set in the 500 worlds of Ultramar, which is always going to be an important campaign because it's one of the most important regions of the galaxy, but also if the Nightbringer does come back, or at least, let's say he combines at least a bunch of shards of the Nightbringer into one very large shard, that is still going to be devastating because you're still going to have the problem of bringing together a being that is the Imperium likely just doesn't have the technology to match right now. So kind of like Ulkrons. It's a good question. Yeah, that's actually a really good comparison, Andarion, because if you're not familiar, in the old kind of Necrons lore, they did have the Catan as like their actual gods, and so when they would have the Nightbringer alongside them, that's their actual god, and they didn't turn against their gods as they have in modern Warhammer 40k lore. So the Necrosaur is basically an old style Necron lord, and that's going to be, I think, very popular with a lot of the fan base, because there are lots of people that saw Games Workshop's kind of retconning of the old Necron lore and didn't really like it. They prefer old Necron lore. So if the Necrosaur is still enthralled to the Nightbringer, as the lore seems to imply that he is, then yeah, he's basically from old 40k, and I think a lot of people will like that development as a character, and I think it makes a lot of sense because the Necrons, you know, most of them are mindless automata, but at the same time, the Lords vary a lot in their temperament in terms of how they view the Imperium, and so I think it makes a lot of sense for a character like the Necrosaur to kind of, or Games Workshop at the very least, to kind of bring in kind of old Cron style lore for people to have fun with. They are fine characters, but I wish other factions get something too. Yes, I mean, this is one of the controversies around the 500 Worlds lore, is that it does once again drive home just how much attention Games Workshop give to the Ultramarines compared to everybody else. And the 500 Worlds campaign has massive potential to be huge for the setting, but most importantly, it does have massive potential to push forward a lot of Xenos lore. So I think people are really hoping that the Tau, who are encroaching upon the 500 Worlds of Ultramar, they will get a bunch of attention, and they are getting some new models that are likely connected to the 500 World storyline. So the Tau should get some new attention, and also the Kin, the Leagues of Votann, they should be getting some attention, because the Kin are constantly trying to strive out now from the center of the galaxy, trying to find like realms where they can, you know, exist peacefully. But ultimately, it's going to come down to whether the Ultramarines are willing to allow the Kin to coexist alongside them. And given that Guilliman is looking for allies where he can, he's even willing to ally with the Eldar, it wouldn't surprise me to see an Ultramarine Leagues of Votann team up. And, you know, let's face it, like, dwarves are always one of the most popular factions in any fantasy setting, and 40k has fantasy elements of it. So I think that it makes a lot of sense to bring the Votann lore forward in this respect. The Votann have appeared in a fair few books at this point, but it would be, yeah, I think we're really looking to develop that relationship between the Imperium and the Votann, which will tell us more about the Votann's history, who they fought alongside in the Horus Heresy, etc. So we will see. Titus is just that guy, throws off the warp like it's nothing. 500 Worlds will take him like 2 months. Only way he could be more effective is if he was a Blood Angel. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is kind of funny. Like, the end of Space Marine 2 is funny in that regard. I don't know how you guys felt, but at the end of Space Marine 2, Titus speaks to Marneus Calgar, and Marneus Calgar, you know, apologizes that he took him so long to get him out of the, you know, Inquisition's clutches, but he also basically says, like, because everybody was wondering, I did a stream on it like years ago where I was like, hey, well, are we going to find out what is it about Titus? How come he did have this resilience to the warp? I never thought he was a traitor, but it was always odd that he had some sort of resilience to the warp here. Didn't seem to affect him. And Marneus Calgar goes, it's, you know, it's not the Inquisition's fault that they didn't realize, you're just built different, Titus. And yeah, that was basically how they left it. So they could have gone more down the route of, like, saying, because Titus does allegedly hear from the Emperor when he wakes up, so it does, yeah, that could have been a route they go down, that the Emperor kind of shielded Titus from harm or something like that. But yeah, he's just built different, so we don't know. But yeah, him controlling the 500 Worlds will be interesting, because they've also, if you haven't looked at the 500 Worlds models, the ones that have come out, they've got a bunch of new Ultramarine characters, in addition to, like, Gadriel from Space Marine 2 and Madreus, whatever the other guy's called. And like, they're clearly building up a big kind of character arc for the Ultramarines and Titus to have some sort of, like, internal conflict within the higher echelons of Guilliman's commanders. But yeah, Titus, I guess people want to see Titus kick ass, don't they? So we'll see. We definitely want to see him fighting a massive Catan shard, in kind of in the same vein as Uriel Ventress, and that has got to happen at some point. So we'll see. Who can GW power scale more, Titus or Mephiston? Good question. I reckon. I honestly reckon if they had to fight, my money would be on Titus. It's going to come down to the author, but I know they'd find a way to give Titus the win. I just know they would do. But I mean, fair enough. He's just printing money for them, isn't he? Basically. In the UK, it's actually a thing that people say now that Games Workshop are as close to printing money as you get in this country. Titus already has beef with Leandros. I would really like, because there was one part of Space Marine 2 that was so disappointing, was the fact that Titus basically just sort of accepts that Leandros was right, and it always kind of annoyed me because of everything Titus went through. I just don't believe you could be so chill and so cool that you would not be angry at Leandros, and the way Leandros is like the stain of suspicion. But here's the thing: now that Guilliman has returned, and now that Titus is Warden of Ultramar, at that point, Leandros can't touch him. Like Leandros could walk into the room and Titus just be holding a Xenos artifact and, kissing it. And like, Leandros couldn't do shit because Guilliman is the Lord Commander of the Imperium and the Inquisition wouldn't dare go against him in that kind of regard. So it's just, and Titus just massively outranks him. I guess, yeah, it's Titus would never have to worry about the Inquisition stain and stare going towards the Ultramarines because Guilliman would just beat the shit out of them. So it's just not really going to be a problem. So I would love to see some flaunting of Titus's new position for Leandros. Not something I think will happen because of Titus's that kind of noble character, but I'll be honest, my heart yearns for it. My heart yearns to see Leandros be put in his place. Also, and I'm not going to lie, I've always hated the Leandros model, even before it was the model of Leandros. I always thought that was the worst chaplain model. I thought the Indomitus chaplain model was pretty good, but the original Primarchs chaplain was crap. Sorry. RGW. Do they ever say how or when the Nightbringer was shattered? So they don't. There's no story of the Nightbringer specifically being shattered. We do have the story of Landagor being destroyed. So that's a pretty big kind of background plot point of the Twice Dead King series, where the Ishatak dynasty, they were incredibly connected to the gravitic trebuchet and the technology that ultimately shattered Landagor into pieces. Problem that you have is that all of the memories the Necrons have of the war in heaven, and this comes up in like Infinite Divine as well, the problem that you have is that it's highly likely that the Silent King deleted memories from people and maybe added memories to other people, kind of in the same vein as the Emperor, really. And so can people really trust their memories of the war in heaven is a good question. But we know that the Necrons kind of turned on the Catan, and they could kill Landagor, which is what created the Flayer curse. But the rest of them, they could only kind of they could only shatter. And it seems it was a relatively drawn out conflict as the Catan realized the Necrons had turned on them. But ultimately, just the technology of the Necrons was so high at that point in time, and they were so numerous and I guess completely unified under the thrall of the Silent King, that the Catan eventually were overwhelmed. But the fact that the Necrons pulled that off is still one of those things that's deep within the mystery of 40k, because surely the Catan, once they realized they were being betrayed, would have had the power to fight back. So how this happened, we don't know. But it said even characters like the Silent King, they got to the point where they could fight Catan. They were just that strong. To be honest, I always forget that the Votan exist. Yeah, I mean, they are sort of one of those things that has this. Yeah, they're right up there with things that have massive potential. I guess it's sort of weird because, like I say, dwarves are historically, I think, one of the fantasy factions that people love the most. But given that Eldar have been such a flop so consistently over 40k's history, Games Workshop have been less willing, I think, to push the Votan lore hard. But the models have been very popular, and even the Eldar lore looks like it's starting to pick up. So as we talked about last week, one of the most popular books of last year was Voidscarred, which is a novel about the Corsairs, Eldar Corsairs, and that is a big deal. That's quite a big deal for Games Workshop to find out that actually people do quite like Eldar when they're written well. It's just a lot of the time the Eldar lore is not very good, and that therefore tells us that if Games Workshop just think deeply about how they want to use the Votan, think a lot about how they want to use the Eldar, and come up with some good ideas, they'll sell a lot of models. People will be really hyped on that. And it's just the fact that they don't really give any kind of any writers kind of freedom to write kind of exciting, interesting stories for their factions that kind of holds them back. So I hope that whoever gets, I think it's Gav Thorpe wrote the other wrote the High Carl's Oath novel. That was pretty good. And I think that Mike Brooks wrote Voidsguard. I think if you sort of give them the authority to kind of push ahead with their kind of main storylines, characters that they know will be new and engaging and interesting, I think that they will do very well. But I totally get where you're coming from, where we can all kind of forget the Votann exist. Like personally on the channel, I've been sort of waiting for, like, I guess it was about there now, but I've been waiting for a while to do like a proper Votann deep dive, probably as a video at some point, because we are still waiting on a lot of Votann lore to come out. And I like right now, if you ask me to tell you the history of the Votann, we have the mythology of the Votann and that kind of thing, but exactly what they were doing throughout 40k's history, a lot of it we just don't know yet, because Games Workshop have yet to put it into print. So we will see how that goes. Talking Tanith and the Necrons, I knew updates bring Catan closer to how they are depicted in the books. I mean, fly and 6-inch movement was just stupid. Interesting. I'll be honest, I'm completely out of the loop on the new rules. I saw that I think they had to tweak some of the new rules quite immediately, didn't they, or something? I don't know if something came out and it was just broken, but yeah, hopefully. I mean, it's that weird time of the edition. Do you know what I mean, brother? It's that time when we sort of know 11th edition is coming, and so for a lot of the fandom, you sort of pull back at this point because you're like, oh, I can't be asked to learn new rules. I can't be asked to get heavily invested in the edition when 11th edition is just kind of around the corner. So you'll get a lot of people right now. They'll be starting their orc armies. They'll be getting a new Space Marine army ready for the new edition, and yeah, sort of things kind of quieten down a bit. I'll be pretty much solely playing Horus Heresy till 11th edition come, I think, personally. But yeah, I don't know how you guys feel. But it also means that you do get some crazier rules coming out from Games Workshop as they try to give the edition some spice at the end, which would be quite fun. What did you think of Ashes of the Imperium? Other than a few cool parts, I thought it was a bit of a boring read. Interesting. So I actually did a whole stream with Christian on it. In terms of being a boring read, you might not be alone, actually. I think it didn't do that well. I think it was 4th or 5th most popular book of last year, and that was lower than I thought it would be. I definitely thought it was very well written. I think that Chris Ray is one of the best writers you could have chosen to write politics at that scale in 40k. Very few writers could have pulled that off, done justice to so many Primarchs as they did. In terms of what I thought of it, I really liked it, actually. I thought it was really good. So it starts off plot lines for most of the Primarchs. It gives you a big direction in which way they want to go. So, of course, Guilliman and Dawn is the obvious one. They've been drawn into conflict, and we kind of know roughly where that's going. But as it unfolds, I was still really interested. I think that the back and forth of Rogel Dawn bringing the Emperor back, to Guilliman taking over, to Rogel Dawn bringing the Primarchs onto his side, to Guilliman coming out with this kind of like left hand, this left hook of bringing all of the humans onto his side, and then all of the Primarchs sort of falling in line behind that. This was a really interesting back and forth between two Primarchs that we know are heavily opinionated, and the fact that you had kind of some really great moments for most of the Primarchs was great. And even by their absence, like, you know, Jagatai Khan doesn't say too much in the novel for obvious reasons. He's barely alive at this point in time, and of course Corvus Corax is missing. That was really telling. I think the Games Workshop, I'm really excited for the Scouring, because that book tells me that they have planned a lot of this. They sort of know where they're going. They very clearly know they want to do something big with Corvus, something big with the Khan, and of course, Dawn and Guilliman, they've likely planned this out for a long time of how they expect everything to unfold. And it clashes in a really good way. It clashes with the Guilliman we have in 40k. Guilliman we have in 40k, you know, I've spoken about the Silent King, I've spoken about the Dark Imperium. He doesn't make many kind of big errors, and like the errors he makes, things, you know, whatever you want to talk about, whether it's falling to Mortarion, messing with demon hosts, or taking on the Silent King, all of his quote-unquote errors are not really errors in the long run. Guilliman is kind of getting nothing but net in 40k, and that was going a little bit tiresome. But given that we now have this Guilliman in 30k who is making some pretty big mistakes, and kind of the opposite, even when Guilliman's doing the right thing, like focusing on the survival of the Emperor, he's going about it the wrong way and sort of making things worse, and he's going to be likely a key ingredient of starting off the Inquisition. We know how well that's going to go, and yeah, I'm kind of enjoying it. So yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, you're definitely entitled to your opinion, so no disrespect, but yeah, I think I actually quite enjoyed it. Sandman, it's time to drink. How does this relate to the King in Yellow? Actually, it would be funny to make Sandman take a shot each King in Yellow mention. Yeah, you know what is funny? So one of the videos that I was working on, I think I mentioned this before. One of the videos I'm working on, it is a video, sort of a beginner's video. I'm with my editor on the Primarchs and Legions, and it's very long at this point in time. But one of the things I thought that might be funny, I just feel like it would be. I've decided not to do it. One of the things I thought would be funny is, of course, we have like who the Primarchs are, homeworlds, what the legions are, how they operated, and then at the end of each legion, I thought it would be quite funny to explain how this ties to the King in Yellow. Maybe that could be a stream I do for fun. It's just like to try and tie each Primarch into the King in Yellow storyline and how I do it. And maybe in that stream we'd get to some sort of kernel of truth. Maybe in thinking about all that, because I think. Let's think about it. The Lion and Gilliman, they're not going to be. But then who? Right, let's count through. So Fulgrim and Perturabo, the Emperor's Children are interested. The Iron Warriors are not. Lehman Russ is interested. Yeah, I think we do a whole stream on this. You know, we could definitely make that work. But yeah, definitely we could do it. We could do it as a drinking game, maybe. I don't know actually if you're allowed to do that on YouTube. Are you allowed to drink when you're on YouTube? I presume so. I feel like people have done that, but I don't know. Maybe I'll get in trouble. I just finished Xenos for the first time. Eisenhorn Xenos. But I'm confused about where it falls in the timeline. It is set before the fall of Cadia. It is set before the fall of Cadia, yeah. So this is what's kind of interesting, and this often comes up when we talk about the King in Yellow, is that, well, how big of a deal is this if it's set before the fall of Cadia? Which is a great question. And the reason that we can be pretty confident it's sort of going to be very impactful is, A, the content of the final book is massive, and in addition to that, it is set in an alternate reality, a lot of the key stuff. So it's not going to... Time isn't something you're gonna have to worry about for the Eisenhorns of the Beckwood series, but we'll see. Do you think Titus is like a chosen warrior or emperor, chosen warrior of the Emperor, similar to a saint? Interesting. I thought you were going to say the Golden Warrior of like the Blood Angels, which would be very funny if Titus took over the Golden Warrior prophecy of the Blood Angels. That would be amazing. That would be so. That'd be hilarious. Anyway, but in terms of is he a chosen warrior or something like a saint, perhaps. So we do know that. Like in the past I would have said no, but in Modern 40k, so I spoke about this the other day, where if you read the Dawn of Fire series, especially towards the end, as the Emperor is becoming more and more powerful, as they call it the awakening of the Emperor, as the Emperor awakens more and more, he's able to kind of do more and more stuff in the galaxy today. And there's one point in the final book which just really like pushes this so far, where Gilliman's battling these word bearers, and one of them fires these kind of like warp arrows at Gilliman that would kill him, and then it just drops into the book that the Emperor just reaches down and saves Gilliman. And that's it. Then he carries on. And they don't really go into it any further than that. It's just that's it. That the Emperor will dive in to save their characters. And so what happened to Titus at the end of the Space Marine 2, I think is likely something similar. It was just the Emperor is watching over Gilliman and the Lion. The Emperor is watching over the greatest heroes of the Imperium. And if they are drawn into danger, he expends a bit of power to save them. So I think it is very likely, given the conclusion of the Dawn of Fire series, that really was the Emperor diving in to turn him to save Titus. Whether that makes him an Imperial Saint, less so. Imperial Saints seem to be kind of like they're basically orcs, you know. They're the Gazgals of humanity. They're this kind of like pool of faith within the Imperium of Man. And so, yeah, I think probably the best comparison for Imperial Saints is Gazgal. I reckon they're all just orcs. That's all Celestinas. That's all Keshes. They're all just orcs. I hope he puts down the chainsword and picks up a power sword finally. You know what? I get where you're coming from, because the power sword is my weapon of choice. Space Marine 2, all day power sword. But I do like the chainsword as well. I do think it is cool, and I have a lot of respect for it. And given that, because where you're coming from as well, I don't know if you play the game, Gerard, but like at the same time as power swords are great, you never see chainswords on characters in the game, because power swords are usually almost always better and have a wider purpose. So I think that him actually having a chainsword is quite nice, because obviously you can't change Titus's war gear in the game, But yeah, I get where you're coming from. Especially because it does feel a little bit wrong, because as you play the Space Marine 2 campaign, of course, you sort of unlock weapons as you go along. And so by the end of it, you know, depending on your playstyle, you've probably, by the end of the game, you've probably got a thunder hammer and a melter gun and whatever other weaponry you've got. So you've got kind of all of this insane weaponry, and then the game finishes and he just goes back to using a chainsword. It feels a little bit wrong, do you know what I mean? But I get where you're coming from. Arios has got a thunder hammer, so fair enough. And his thunder hammer is kind of his thing. Maybe they positively charged a bunch of Blackstone, turning it basically into a warp nuke and shot it at a Catan. Interesting. Well, you know what? I will have to do a video on like the Twice Dead King lore, because there is like the Twice Dead King. If you've never read it, especially if you're like Infinite Divine, as so many people do, you'll love the Twice Dead King, and it gives us probably the most detail on the War in Heaven we've ever had. The Battle of the Sokar Gate is the name of like the big final battle that the Necrons have against the old ones, and when they turn on the Catan, and it's like even just finding out that kind of detail is just new lore. It's just whole new stuff. So like yeah, definitely recommend you read that. But I'll do a video on that at some point. But I am currently working on some stuff for my editor, and he has done. Yeah, I owe him a lot of stuff to get out that I need to do on my side. So that's why I've been streaming a little bit less this year, starting off the year at the very least. Into February, I'm going to go back definitely to streaming at least 2-3 times a week. But for January, I am going to be a little bit quieter as I just focus on getting these videos done, because they're all pretty big. They're all pretty impactful, and I think you guys will like them. But yes, I need to finish a bunch of stuff basically. I fear the collect the shards of the Nightbringer will end up the same as collect all the swords of the Inari. I think you're right. I think you're right, Ardia. But to be entirely fair, I don't think it will be as bad, because when it comes to the collect all the Chrome swords of the Inari, you can't do anything with that. You know, you've got 4. Having 4 is the same as having none. It's just pointless, right? Well, I mean, they're fancy swords and they have cool abilities, to be entirely fair. But like, if the Necrosaur is able to gather together a bunch of Catan shards, he can summon the biggest version of the Nightbringer that we've ever seen in 40k, and that'll be awesome. That'll be awesome. Just to see that battle will be incredible. Somehow Titus will put that on the bag, but like that would be amazing. So at least we're going to get that conclusion, and that I think is going to be something. Please do let me know in the comments what you guys think about this new Necron character, the Necrosaur, and do you think, I mean, how is a fully formed Catan, how is the full revelation of the Nightbringer ever going to stand a chance against the sheer power that is Captain Titus? Because of course, Captain Titus is the most powerful character in 40k, if the Emperor has anything to say about it. But it is still pretty interesting new lore for us to get. Necron's lore has been incredibly popular in recent years, and I think that a new kind of big bad for the Necrons to kind of have is a spanner thrown in the works. He's going to be an enemy not just to the Imperium, but to the Necrons also. So perhaps this will force the Silent King to come into allyship with the Imperium ultimately, just to bring this guy down. But we will see. Anyway, thank you so much to everybody that watches the stream. Please let me know in the comments what you think. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. I am currently working on some videos, so I will stream again every week, but I'll be streaming a little bit less this month as I work to get those done. But thank you so much for watching. I'll just answer a couple of questions before I log off, because it always cuts me off mid-sentence, and then I will see you guys all next time.